Are there too many people in the world? Well, that's a question many find just too sensitive to tackle. What do you think? Well, let me tell you that currently about 75 million people are added to the world's population every year. That's the equivalent of about half the people living here in Bangladesh. If that were to continue, then by 2025, there would be 8 billion people on Earth, up from the current figure of just about 7 billion. And that's putting fear into so many people who believe that the Earth's resources simply can't cope. Is there a global population crisis? And if there is, what can we do about it? Leaving aside city-states such as Singapore, Bangladesh is the world's most densely populated nation. Much of the country is vulnerable to flooding. About a quarter of its landmass is regularly submerged during the monsoon, and some predict that with global warming, nearly half the country could disappear. That's why the government has battled for years to try to reduce the rate of population growth, and it's had some success. Now there are 2.7 children on average per family here. That's down from 7 40 years ago. But in many countries, experts are predicting much more population growth. Asia and Africa will account for most of the world's projected increase of 1.2 billion people by 2025. The largest increase will be in India. It could exceed China as the world's most populous country. But it's in sub-Saharan Africa that we're seeing the most rapid growth. Countries there will add on 350 million people by 2025, while those in Latin America and the Caribbean will increase by about 100 million. However, in Europe and the West, the picture is more mixed. Some countries are actually experiencing a decline in their populations. Russia, Ukraine, almost all countries in Eastern Europe, along with Italy and Japan, are expected to see their populations go down substantially. But the numbers don't tell you everything. Many believe that although there are fewer people in the developed world, the pressure the rich put on the Earth's resources is much greater. Take an average person in Bangladesh. They consume 16 times less than the average American. So, is there such a thing as a global population crisis? That's our BBC World Debate. Welcome to the Lal Bag Fort in the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka. This fort is in the old part of the city, beautiful, isn't it? And it was built back in 1678 by the then Viceroy of Bengal. It was the scene of a bloody battle against the British in the First War of Independence in the 19th century. And I wonder if it's going to be the scene of a verbal clash today in our debate on the thorny issue of population. Well, we've assembled a panel from just about every continent in the world whose views are as varied as their backgrounds to discuss the topic of population and whether we should have population control. First of all, from Bangladesh, here we have Nurun Akem Nabi. He's Professor of Population Science at the University of Dhaka, and he's a regular contributor on the international scene. He's passionate about population control, so much so that he's restricted himself and his wife to having just one child. Rosamond McDougall is a director at the Optimum Population Trust, which is a British-based think tank that campaigns for a gradual population decrease globally. The OPT believes the world population needs to contract to a maximum of 5 billion people, which it says is what the Earth can comfortably support. From Columbia University in New York is Professor Matthew Connelly, who wrote a controversial book called Fatal Misconception: The Struggle to Control World Population. He says sexism and racism are often at the root of global efforts to bring down the number of people in the world. From Beijing is Wang Xiao. He's managing editor of a magazine called Caixin, described by the Wall Street Journal as the leading financial publication in China. Wang Xiao has lived through China's aggressive one-child policy and has some concerns about the impact it's had. And Elia Zulu from Malawi is based in Nairobi at the African Population and Health Research Centre. He's also president of the Union for African Population Studies. He believes population is growing too rapidly, especially in Africa, and that urgent action is needed to encourage a reduction in the number of people in Africa. Rosamond McDougall, are there too many people in the world?
We're entering a period of dangerous climate change and a rapid depletion of resources. So the answer is yes, it's already overpopulated.
Matthew Connolly?
There's too much poverty in the world. There's too much poor health. We're having too big of an impact on the planet. But you can't make these kinds of problems go away just by making people go away. So no, it's not a question of people, not in terms of numbers. It's really about the kind of lives that people are living.
But is that one way perhaps of solving these population imbalances?
I believe so. The internal migration in China can prove it. The coastal area of China is much richer than other parts of China, but also has a much lower birth rate. That's why I have just said that Shanghai and Tianjin, the local registered population is shrinking in the past 15 years. And they are only compensated by the immigrants from other parts of China. Today there are 150 million migrant workers working in big cities. And it's good for them, it's good for the cities they are working in.
Elia Zulu, do you think it's a good idea, migration from the countries that are overpopulated, as in Africa, to go to Europe, for instance?
I think the whole issue of population, again, going to the initial problem that we started discussing, I think it's a problem to the extent that there's no free mobility of people from various parts of the world to the other, to the extent that there's no equitable distribution of whether it's resources or opportunities and so on. But I think the truth is that the countries that are having the shrinking population problem will not be willing to take anybody who can go there. So I think you can't have an argument that it's okay for other populations to grow rapidly because others don't have enough people. Because most of these countries, actually a big chunk of their populations are illiterate people, and the developed countries tend to get the highly skilled people to go there. And if you promote this migration issue, the end result is that the countries that are actually the developing countries, the ones that are having the rapid population growth issue, the ones that are poorer, are going to even get poorer because more of their personnel or human resources are going to shift to the West.
But it's really helped Bangladesh, hasn't it, Professor Nabi? Migration, so much money.
Migration is a positive indicator of social development. The only reason we cannot use that as a vehicle is because of the immigration policy of other shrinking population countries, if I say so. Because you look at the history of American immigration policy. The open policy was up to 1917, and then the restrictive policy came to 65, and then after what happened. So if you have a global mobility, what he mentioned, then I think you will have less thing to talk about, these incentives and other things.
Rosamond McDougall, is migration perhaps part of the solution when we talk about population?
It's part of the solution, I think, in some areas of the world, but I think the numbers are simply too vast for it to be any long-term solution. The numbers of people who might need to migrate or want to migrate in the future. It won't work unless you actually stabilize population at the same time.
I think that if you look back, at history, and I admit it, I'm an historian, but the reason is that you look at history because you can't use the future as evidence. What may be, right? But you can't use the future as evidence to say that this can't go on or we're not going to support this many people and so on. But if you look back, through history, what you see is that the way in which the world is divided up now to keep people separate and unequal is a relatively recent invention. If you go back 100 years, people were moving around the globe with much more freedom than they have today. And so, if you believe that capital and goods and ideas ought to be able to circulate around the world and to make the world a better place, then why can't people? So I think that's the way we're headed.
Fundamental point, which is you're saying that implying that we cannot take evidence about the future.
You can't use the future as evidence.
Just look at what is happening with climate change. If we do as you say and do nothing, what will the consequences be? Because we're not allowed to take the future evidence.
Well, why do you say I want to do nothing? I want to reduce consumption because that's what's causing global warming.
Well, let's just finish with a final question to all of you. Yes or no? Elia Zulu, do you think that world population is going to continue growing?
The world population will continue to grow for a long time to come. Even when fertility rates go down quite a bit because there's a momentum that has already been established, and I think that it's very, very important that that governments should really help people.
Wang Xiao?
The world population, this current growth, I think, will continue. But in history, the world population grows and contracts in history. And for example, in China, today, the official number for the total fertility rate is 1.8, but the unofficial but more credible number is 1.57. That means in 10 generations, Chinese people, there will be only a little more than 100 million Chinese people left. So anything can happen to the growth process.
So you don't know. Rosamond McDougall, do you think world population will continue growing?
It's inevitable that it will continue growing, but it could grow more slowly if people made the effort.
Professor Nabi?
Yes, it will continue growing, and for some countries it will, do in a slower rate, and in some countries at a higher rate. So it will continue.
Matthew Connolly?
I think it will too, but we've been surprised before. I wouldn't be surprised if we were surprised again.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, panel. We've got to stop it there. I think that certainly through this debate we've managed to contribute to a subject which many people believe has for so long been brushed under the carpet. I think we've managed to just illustrate why this is a difficult subject that does present governments and policymakers with so many challenges and dilemmas. I hope that you've enjoyed and learned a bit from our very lively and timely discussions. Thank you to all our panel. Thank you to our audience here from the Lal Bag Fort in the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka. From me, Zainab Badawi. Goodbye.